Thank you all for joining us. This is my first time on this side of the kind of guiding, asking questions, so bear with me. I just want to thank everybody for coming today. And today it's gonna be more of like a peer-to-peer conversation. I think what's so great about having everybody here is that most of us know each other, and so I think a more conversational situation might be more engaging, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end. But before we start too, I just want to say, yes, as we're in this moment to a movement, I think that we have to just celebrate that there are so many great Asian-led TV and movies that happened this year. So I just want to give some shout outs to Joyride, American Born Chinese, Never Have I Ever, Past Lives, Beef, Lady Parts, Pachinko, Polite Society, Shortcomings. I'm sure there's a few more that I'm missing, but I think that it really does feel like a movement. And so today also I'd like to maybe talk more about craft and kind of celebrate everyone's work rather than focusing on just the struggles of representation, which everybody in this room kind of understands that. So I kind of want to start from the beginning. I really want to get to know you guys better. So I just kind of wanted to ask everybody kind of about their beginnings. What inspired them? You know, how'd you grow up? Were your parents kind of like into the arts? Like when were the seeds of directing and storytelling planted? Anybody want to jump in?
That's a good question.
Yeah, let's get to know each other.
Dan?
Okay. So when I was 2 years old, there was this play in Beijing, and I was in a little duck costume, and suddenly I loved the theater. That's actually true. So I pursued theater all in middle school, late elementary, and high school, and I was acting, dancer mainly because of my martial arts background. But then I got a editing grant in high school. So we got to know the Avid Adrenaline, and I got really into editing. And for the longest time in my life, my only goal was to get those little ACE letters. And I never thought about directing after college. During college, I went to NYU Tisch, and I did not do a thesis film because I'm like, I'm just going to edit. Who needs a thesis film? So yeah, I worked in post-production in New York. I did documentaries, advertising. I moved to LA to pursue scripted. And then at some point in LA, when you start doing a lot of side jobs, what's great about the community is everyone's like, hey, what are you doing? Do you want to work on some stuff? Do you want to direct? And I'm like, sure. So I did some small stunt short films that luckily my showrunner on Walking Dead saw. I was like, hey, is this something you want to do? And he gave me that opportunity to direct. So I was the first shadow on that show, official shadow. So I shadowed on season 7. And I was like, well, I don't know if they're going to give me an episode AMC would for a sword fighting dancing musical. So that's when I decided to produce and invest in my own short film that I wrote and got some cast in Walking Dead involved in. Wow. And we screened it for the whole cast and crew and invited all the writers of Walking Dead. And so luckily they came. And 3 weeks later, I was directing television and I caught the bug and just, Bravo. It's been onward since.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I want to see that short.
Yeah.
Is it online?
Yeah, I'll DM you the link.
What about everybody else who wants to see it?
Yeah. Why don't we just show it?
The sword fighting dancing musical is on IMDb. It's my own short. I actually decided not to make public. Actually, I don't really know why.
It's too good.
It's time. It's time.
No, yeah. I'll get it out there.
Yeah. What about you, Adele? Where were your seeds planted?
I feel a little bit like a poser here. Most of my career was in writing and producing, and directing. I got really lucky because we wrote the script, my friends Teresa Shao and Cherry Chiva and I, because we just wanted to write the kind of movie we wish we had when we were thirsty, messy 20-somethings. And Point Grey, which is Seth Rogen's company, they're used to working with a lot of first-time writer-directors, especially in the comedy space. And I had not really thought about it up to them, but I'd written and produced for television, so I felt really comfortable with everything except for the action part of it. And the producers brought up the idea with me, and the first thing out of my mouth was just absolutely. And in retrospect, I realized, as you were talking about, growing up, I grew up in Malaysia and was writing all my school plays, and again, Muslim country, all girls school, and all my plays were just about potty mouthed hookers, and you'd write it, and I'd be directing the whole thing and kind of bringing it together. And as I directed Joyride, realized it all just came full circle to this. So I'd assumed my whole career it was purely about writing, but really there's a reason I got into television, which is very much, a writer's medium, and just being able to have that control if you're a freak about it, and just being able to have agency over the entire process was something I was just used to in television, and getting that opportunity and that privilege to do that in directing was tremendous, like huge. So you guys have it really good. Like the director life, by the way, like that, how everybody is just like, there's like snacks and cars, like they just like take you places. It's fantastic. So that's like the really kind of short, quick version of it.
I love that.
That's why I got into it.
Yeah.
Cars and snacks.
Kabir?
Yeah. It's funny, actually. Dan's and my stories are very similar and also very different, I think. Because I also, came up as a little kid doing lots of theater. I was not an actor, and I was not good when I did. But I just spent most of my time in theater. I spent more time in theater, and especially in high school and then in college, than I did in class. And never had thought about doing this. My parents were super into movies, a long history of the family in India being, poets, and now, big, it's very weird. My family's a big Bollywood family, which is not why I got into this. And they're all like, wow, you did all this. It's so amazing on your own. I was like, you guys didn't ever help or ask. That's cool. But, I'd never occurred to me that this was a thing you could do. This wasn't like a job. You know what I mean? Like, you don't like, what? How does that happen? Until, a friend of mine was like, you just spend all your time in theater and you're a communications major and you love movies. You should go to film school. And I was like, what? Yeah, actually I should. That's crazy. And then I did. And I also, fell into editing. I loved it so much. I was an editor for 20 years full time. Like you, I was also like, a career goal was to get into ACE, like have the letters after your name, and was like, unlike you, no one ever said to me, hey, do you want to direct? When you said that, I was like, oh, did I? I missed all those people. Many years of just saying to people when I was an editor that I was like, this footage is all like messed up. We're spending so much time trying to fix it. Like if you hired me to direct it, I had like 23-year-old me. If you hired me to direct it, it would be better. And eventually people started saying yes, very slowly, like to small projects and then bigger and bigger. And then, many moons go by and finally enough people said yes. And now here we are.
Anu?
We were like jumping around. This is wild.
Yeah.
This is such an interesting order to be speaking in.
There is a pattern, but you'll have to guess.
Bananas to me. But maybe it's fun for the viewer. I wanted to be a director my whole life. Like since I was little, like I just wanted to make art house films. Like I grew up, my dad is a scientist, and but he like when he came to the States, we're both my parents are from India, and when he came to the States in the late 60s, the only movies he could see were the movies that were shown on campus, and they were like Fellini and Ingmar Bergman movies, and those are the movies he showed me when I was a kid. So I saw like all of Bergman's films by the time I was 13, and I just thought like movies were things you didn't really understand but like looked nice. I had no sense of structure, and maybe I still don't, but and then I went to film school, which I don't think people need to do. But and I say that just because like I think everyone's stories are different, and how people come to television directing specifically is very, very different. And I was in school in New York and really wanted to make my art house films, and I graduated thinking I'd get like millions of dollars to make them, and that didn't happen. So I got into comedy, and I was like making there's UCB is so vibrant in New York, and all my friends were doing comedy, and I was kind of like producing, directing sketches for them. And then through like many years, I think like 8 years of doing that, slowly my comedy friends were kind of rising the ranks. I think Maureen, we have like similar, just there's so many people are doing things, and they're just kind of all rising at the same time. And I had done like a tiny little show for Adult Swim that like nobody saw. And one of my friends was starting a new show called The Other Two. I'd worked with her at College Humor, Sarah Schneider. I worked with her like years ago. And she was like, hey, I know you like make little art house experimental movies, but like you want to like direct, right? And I was like, yeah. And so I interviewed for a job to direct The Other Two, and I didn't get it. They called me. They were like, you don't really have TV experience. Do you want to shadow? And I was like, yeah, I really do. And then a few weeks later, they called back and they were like, hey, so can you do 2 episodes? And I was like, yeah. And I found out later, I don't know if this is true. I wonder if anybody can corroborate this, but Nicole Hollofsoner was supposed to direct, and she had to drop out, and they like everybody else was booked. And I was like the last person that they were just like, this one woman's available. And then they just gave me an opportunity, and I didn't fuck it up. So And then I kept doing television with also the goal of always making my little like experimental films on the side, which I still do because I'm always trying to do that. Maybe I should take some of them offline though. I think too many of my stuff is online.
And then Din?
I'm trying to figure out which version of the story makes sense. Television were my parents. Being a latchkey kid, being a refugee, and television was the thing. The thing that taught me a lot. I remember watching the Fonz and learning like how to be bad, but also how to be righteous and honorable. And like what was it? Gary Coleman on A Different Strokes taught me a lot about just comedy.
And how to be righteous and honorable.
Yeah, same characters, just different stature, literally. And then as I got into like my teens and 20s, my friends and I started to smoke a lot of weed. And that was like the thing when we watched a lot of movies, Scorsese, Michael Mann, Heat, especially Heat. I have two of my really good friends here, so they know what I'm talking about. And just being high and going, yeah, I could do that. That makes sense. And then finding my way into film school and then graduating and really failing for like a good, 10 years. But that failure was all lessons. Being an editor, being a camera op, sometimes being a director. And then eventually there were some more drugs. And then there was a short that was made. And that short gave me a lot of confidence to pursue TV, and then got into some programs, and NBC Emerging Directors gave me my first shot at directing New Amsterdam. And that was our last day of production, was the last day of NBC's production in New York because of the pandemic. Wow. And then I was gifted with, the Asian person was gifted with the coronavirus for 3 weeks. And then a year later, I got back in the chair.
I love it. I also love like how you talked about kind of like your influences. Like, are there other kind of things that the rest of you guys that you felt growing up like was your influence, whether it was like a TV show or something? I guess especially like now you guys are making things that are influencing the next generation. Like what influenced you as a kid that maybe kind of still shows up in your work, or, I want to be like that, but I want to have my take on it or my experience? Were there things like that growing up that kind of...
For me, when I was raised in China from 2 to 4, the first TV I ever saw that was broadcast nationally over there was a series called Shioji, which is A Journey to the West. And it was this martial arts epic about the Monkey King. And that's like, when I first saw that, I'm like, I want to learn how to do that. And so I learned martial arts. And a lot of like the action subconsciously, I think, is always influenced by wuxia and the genre of like Chinese martial arts, even when we try to Americanize and modernize things. And then when I moved to America, the first movie I ever saw was Back to the Future 3. So it's like sci-fi and Westerns. Yes, let's just keep doing that.
You saw 3 before the first 2?
Yeah.
Hey, I just moved here.
No, but I mean, like, it's understandable, but did it make, like, were you confused about the whole, like, what was going on?
I didn't speak English that well, so no, I wasn't confused. I was just like, this is cool.
I love that. Yeah. How about you, Adele? Like anything that like influenced you that shows up in your work now, just like a storyteller?
I again grew up in Malaysia, and so a lot of our movies came from Hong Kong, and China. So there was a lot of Stephen Chow and for comedy, which was amazing. I think the big takeaway for me was when I got to this country, we talked about like you're the only Asian in the room, and so when you're like the only Asian in the room, when you get together, suddenly like, all the narratives become about being Asian, and these are things like the Hong Kong directors never ever fucking had to deal with. Like when I was growing up, there was never like, how am I going to say this as an Asian? Like it just never occurred to me. So I think like that was the most empowering thing about following all those directors and all those action movies, which was just assuming that we were the heroes of the story and that there was no like one particular like Asian way of telling a story. And the other big takeaway was this, which was the big revelation here was that was a stereotype about Asians being a certain way. I was just like, what way are we? Tell me. But again, when you watch a lot of the work of the Hong Kong directors, it's like it's all over the place, and just there's just something about it that's sticky. Like when they, for Stephen Chow's comedies, it doesn't matter like kind of where you are in like the Southeast Asian region, like there's something about it that you're just like leaning into. And I felt like that was the thing that just helped me in storytelling and helped me with Joyride.
I love that. Kabir?
Maureen?
Forget the question.
It's cool. I'll take it.
Something that influenced you as a kid maybe shows up in your work.
Yeah, no,
now.
I'm just trying to think of the right way to say this. This is kind of a banana story, and I'll try to keep it short. But it's hopefully makes sense. So I was recently elected to the national board of the Directors Guild, which is very exciting, and also kind of intimidating because a lot of the people who are there at the table are like, at the top of the game. They're like, it's inspiring to be there and to be in these conversations with these people. Like Ava DuVernay, like Barry Jenkins, like Ron Howard, and Steven Spielberg. And obviously, I grew up watching in the 80s. You grow up watching Spielberg movies. Even think about it. You're just watching them, and we used to watch. Rent movies, just watch them all the time, over and over and over. I think some of my background as an editor probably was inspired by the fact that I just used to rewind and fast forward movies all the time, just to watch stuff again, to be like, I didn't realize that I was like taking it apart and figuring out how they filmed it when I was like 10. I was just watching it over and over and like, this piece again, this piece of this movie. How did this thing happen? How did and so I don't know, about a year ago, whatever it was, like I was in the boardroom here upstairs in the building, and I was sitting at the table, and I ended up sitting next to Steven Spielberg, who I had not had the chance to really speak to ever, because you don't want to say the wrong thing. And I'm really good at saying the wrong thing, quite a lot. I'm trying very hard not to now. So far, so good. But I spoke to him after the meeting, and we talked for a minute, and he was super nice. And I suddenly realized, I was like, oh, actually, I'm going on to an Amblin show this week. I had directed on Resident Alien, which is a sci-fi comedy action murder mystery 1-hour show, and which is very common. And he was like, he's like, that's a show. He's like, that's the only show of ours that I will watch dailies on. I was like, oh my God. Yeah. Like, I had already done some episodes in the past. I was going back to do that show, and I was like, I did the math. I was like, have you watched dailies of oh my God, I don't even know what to say about that. And I was just talking to him about it, and I don't know, it came out of my mouth. I was like, I realized that like I had come up editing, and so much of your editing background is like, making sure that you have footage, and you're a director, like we got to make sure we have stuff that cuts together, right? Fundamentally, the entire goal of being on set and filming and getting performances and getting angles is that it cuts together in a way that is cool and fun and hopefully tells a story that works. And so a lot of that is especially in an early stage television director, is about coverage, right? You're making sure like we're shooting this scene, we're going to get all of us, but then you start doing it more and more. Like you don't actually have to, you start feeling a bit more confident about what you're doing and what you're not doing. And I said to him that I was like, it came out of my mouth. I was like, I realized that like as I was shooting Resident Alien season 2, like I really suddenly awoke and like doing this sci-fi sort of horror stuff, like got into just doing bigger, more complex camera moves and just really, committed to doing that. And I realized that I learned how to do that, Steven Spielberg, from watching your movies as a kid.
What'd he say?
He said, it's funny you ask. He said, he's like, that's amazing. He's like, this kind of work is the springboard to you doing movies like that. And he walked away. And I was like,
fucking Yoda juice.
His standard answer.
And he walked away, and I was like shaking because I was like, what did I just? And I'm like, wait, where's the springboard? Who do I call? I haven't seen him since
every
then.
day.
What about you, Adele?
I was thinking about it because truthfully, as a TV director, you're really influenced by the material. Like I just said, like I was so influenced, like I love Michael Haneke, right? I'm not going to take like the after party and make it that. So what I try, like, because it's interesting as like everybody here, if you're getting a television script, you look at the material and you bring yourself to it. Like you have to do that. Otherwise you won't do a good job. You won't understand where to put the camera. You'll just feel so unmoored. And I have my own personal influences, but really being a TV director, and I'm curious what you guys feel. If you don't agree with me, I'm curious to hear. Like, I just feel like you're kind of a chameleon too, because you have to be influenced by the material. You have to listen to like what the script is telling you. Like I do have a tendency to want to have limited coverage when I can, hold on scenes a little bit longer if I can, but also when you're working on half-hour comedies, you do, it's a balance because you need to make sure that you're getting enough coverage so you can like trim a couple minutes if you have to. So I'm like, I have personal artistic influences. I'll try to bring my own, and that's what all of us do as directors. You bring your own aesthetic and choices and taste to a script. But it would be, if I were to come in and be like me first before I listen to what the script is, I can't really do it I'll do the script a disservice, or I'll do the show a disservice. So is that clear?
Yeah, actually, it's one that actually leads into my next question. That's kind of about like when you guys now getting into craft a little bit, like when you read a script, how do you approach it? Like when you read it, are you reading it visually? How are you breaking it down? I'm sure every one of us has like different process. So it'd be great to just kind of, see inside your heads a little bit and see like, what is your process when you first read a script? What are you thinking?
I'm very curious to hear what you guys all do, because it's very different. I do different things every time. So like, I'll read it first. So like I get a script, you've got the job, right? I get a script, I read it once, just read it. So I'm just like reading, experiencing it, because it's the only time you'll experience it as an audience member. So I'll just like experience that. It depends if I've only done one pilot, but like, if it's a season 1, maybe I'll get to see dailies too. But I'm pretty blind to the show. But I'll read the script once. Then I try different things. What I've been doing recently is I'll read it a second time and just write like visual notes, like just visual things that come to me. And then I kind of also do like a character emotional pass that's just like each scene, what's important, like emotional beats. Then I read it a third time and I go through like like each scene, kind of like the arc of the scene, because I just want to make sure I'm tracking that. I do another pass that's like with the visual pass, that's like making sure I get ins and outs. I just basically read the script as much as I can and try to look at it through one lens only. Then that's probably like 3 to 5 times I'll like read the script with like one lens, like a visual eye, an emotional eye, a pacing eye. And then also if a script, yes.
What is this before prep? Is this during the first few days of prep?
It's like soft prep.
Yeah.
Before, which I guess now we're going to get paid for. Which is exciting.
Only
Is
if
that
you're in
true?
features. Only features films.
So anyway, this is soft prep. This is before day 1, because I'm sure a lot of you guys know this. Day 1 is like the concept meeting, your location scouting. So you should know all this stuff before. So it's like soft prep. I get the script. I'm like read as many times as I can, 3 to 5 times, just to memorize the feeling of the script, how it moves. And if you're going to block, it's like 2 to 3 scripts. And then I do like the final like production breakdown pass. That's like just like, that's just nuts and bolts, like locations, art, costumes, hair, and makeup. So I'm ready for the concept meeting. That's like what I will do with the script. So it's all marked up. I've read it like at least 6 times before I go into day 1.
I love hearing your process.
I'm so curious what everybody else does, because even in the DGA class, they teach you like so many people do it differently. Some people just shortlist it from the beginning to end.
What about you guys?
So I also do my own soft prep, usually 3 passes instead of like the amount you do.
it's
Very,
like not
very
every
impressive.
time.
So my first read through, just coming from editorial, visually, almost every scene I'll have a frame in my head. Like it's not always going to go that way, but it's just a very vivid picture. So I write those down. And then my second pass is when I shot list it. And then my third pass is where I go through character objectives and, what they can actually like kind of do what ifs, like what can I do with the characters here on set that can get them to bring something different to the scene. And then that way, when we go into meetings with writers and anything, we can go over line by line read throughs and I can talk about like, would they say it this way or would that way? Or what if you added another line here? Could we get something like this? And it's a very collaborative process, which I think I'm very lucky to be in this day and age, because I've heard before in television that was more frowned upon, but so far my career is okay. So I'm just going to keep doing that.
You're doing good. You're doing good.
That's great. And yeah, I'll do that like the day before every day on set. I'll just take that scene and then just write somewhat of some like things the actor can play with, just so I have some tools in my toolkit that usually get thrown out, but I'm just not sitting there with like no idea of how many different ways a scene can kind of go, you know?
Especially when you have actor meetings, because now, I've always loved doing that. And now it's actually becoming more common, I think, in many shows where they've seen directors, just all of us starting to do that more. So now it's almost like, I've had some shows like, oh yeah, so this season we want all directors to have actors meetings. And I'm like, great, like I did last season? And they're like, yeah. But, it really helps to break down their scenes because then you can get them excited for it, especially since when you have those meetings, they've maybe only read it once and haven't thought about it because they're remembering their current scenes for the current episode.
And I'm so curious, like, on the feature side too, if like you've written it and with like Joyride, right? Like, how are you breaking, obviously writing it and you're having it in your head and then bringing that to like, as you're starting your prep to shoot the movie, especially with, such a big movie out the gate. Like, how was your process for that?
I think again, it was my first movie, and my process is dictated by the fact that most of my career, I've been a writer. So it's, as a writer, you're just like story first. And it's all about plotting the character arc so that, and I'll get to like how that affects the directing in a second, but that to me, it's just my way of doing it. It dictated everything. It dictated whose point of view the scene was in, the emotion of the scene, like the colors picked for the scene. So I had this insane serial killer board of tracking plots and tracking character arcs. And I would involve the actors as early as possible, in a workshop, going through the entire script tonally. So that they knew at every single point where they were in their journey and also specifically in the scene, whose point of view it was, whose scene it was, when it turned. And after we got all of that broken down, John Chu was my mentor throughout a lot of this, because when we were prepping for it, we did this during strict COVID lockdown. So I had to put myself through like at home, director boot camp and basically annoying every single director friend I had. I was just like, tell me, like, how am I gonna get this done? And one of the most important things he told me, it's one of two things, but first, his way of prepping was like for every big sequence and scene was to have like a visual board for it, and that's what I did. So after arcing everything with the characters. Figuring out like what, where we were going to sink all our money into like the big set pieces and making sure it dovetails with the emotion, then getting down into like, keynote, and in every single board, putting it like, again, colors and things you steal from Shot Deck. But for me, what the anchor was the emotions of the scene, of like, how do I want the audience to feel when they're watching this, and putting all of that together, that sort of became like my shorthand for the crew, because you've had it in television. Like my experience in television also colored my process here. You think something is so fucking clear when you put it in thing, like she wears a red dress, she's upset from crying. And suddenly you get on set and they were just like, like the questions of just like bawling, sobbing, or just like one tear. And by red, do you mean more of a rosy thing, more of like a red, so it's, when everybody just has that series of boards to react to, like suddenly there are things you didn't even know you had to describe. Like people just absorb it through osmosis. So that was the most helpful part of it for me. So it was just all of that. So then the emotions of it, the visuals of it, and then the final part of it was just the ticky-tacky getting into it with your heads of department. My process, again, this is coming over from television, is just to be besties with all of my heads of department. And this is the Asian part, to like feed everybody. Just we're going out to like lunch, we're going out to dinner, me and my AD, my set, everything is just like, I know everything about their kids, their lives, their romance lives. Because we all know it, like your heads of department, there's a fifth gear they can go into if they like you, if they give a shit about your production. And everybody in the crew, like nobody's there because they wanted to be an actuary. They're all there because there's something creative they wanted to bring. And somewhere in our fucked up industry, like we've squeezed out like the living life out of them. And so you're getting these people, again, who had a dream, and then, life stomped it out of them. And, they're here because like they had like a 6-week window and they don't know you. So it's bringing them over. This is a much longer answer than you.
I love this answer. This is
I
my
am
favorite.
here for this.
It's like, so yeah, you got the emotions, you got like, what you're going for visually, and then the nitty gritty of just like looking at your sack fucking budget and this group of people who've been stomped on and going just like, hi, we're going to be pals in this, and it's going to be awesome. It's going to be everything you want it to do, and we're going to do it together. So, yeah.
I love that.
I got to follow up to that. There's an infamous edit and a shot in Joyride. Does everyone know what I'm talking about? I want to know if you knew how many frames you wanted that shot to be before you.
Different for the reveal.
Just the infamous shot of the tattoo.
Yeah. Oh,
It's more of a joke than it is a serious question. But how many frames did you know it was going to be that short?
Joe, we had then. Oh God. So with we're a hard R, but so that we wouldn't be an NC-17, it was just like it was the calibration 45 for 32. I wanted to sit on it for as long as humanly possible before we got shut down. But also then that's the actor who's involved. But just the actor taste things, the joke, does it all work? Does it not? You are like literally fucking with 4 frames more, 3 frames less. Does it feel? And then can I just talk about this for 1 second?
Yes.
Because
That's what we're here.
full frontal, tattooed vagina, if you haven't seen the movie, spoiler. But you think when you're a writer, oh, my God, that's going to be so fucking funny. What you don't realize is that it's going to be 3 weeks of your life staring at a vag, and that, you're going to have to audition vages, and you are going to have to talk to the intimacy coordinator about how this vag will be revealed. And then you're going to have to get this close to a body double thing and see a tattoo overlay on it. And then you're going to have to storyboard the whole thing so that everybody's comfortable. And then you won't have your storyboard artist, so that 2 a.m. in the morning before you're shooting this thing, you're there with a Sharpie and your cards drawing these shapes with and there's a V POV with head sticking out of, so you're drawing all these things on little cards that you're distributing to your camera team, and your actors going just that's the vag and that's your head poking into it. So I'm sorry, I've completely gone off the
behind
reservation.
the scenes, just on the DVD
On this
people have
again,
DVD.
but yeah. So to answer, yes, there is there's a lot of conversations about the number of frames.
I like
on
that
top
you're
of
not
everything else.
traumatized by this at all.
What?
I like that you're not traumatized by this.
No.
None.
Stronger for it.
I love that. No, this is great. Also, because it leads into department heads and working with your teams, I think.
I'm fascinated listening to everyone's process. It's so interesting because everyone seems so different, and all in service of doing essentially the same job, right? But all so different. I mean, I know that from where I started with the first projects I was doing to where I am now has evolved so much, and because you made such a good point, Anu, about day one, location scouts, getting out there, and everybody wants answers. Department heads want answers about how you're going to shoot this thing, and you've read the script. And when I'm reading scripts, I'm you're getting a feeling from it, and just along for the story ride of it all. And it definitely took me time. And
What do you think is
practice.
what is your difference from kind of when you started to? You've done so many episodes of TV. Kind of what is that journey?
I think a lot of it. I mean, you get anything else you do more and more times, the confidence. Because when you're first starting out, and you've grumpy line producers are so which way do you think you're going to be facing here at this when we get to this place? We all met 2 hours ago. You've been in the van, you got there, you've looked at it, you've read the script, before a couple of times, understand kind of what it is, as opposed to then. Now I'm very good at being I don't know yet.
Yeah.
We're shooting this in a couple of weeks. I don't know yet, man. I'll figure it out, but I got to think about it. I'm well, we need to know. I'm
sure.
I get that. But
Yeah, feel free to chime in. Anybody who wants to.
it's
yeah.
hard. But you got to stand
day
up.
one, because I'm so curious what you guys think of this, because I think in TV directing, because with features, it's your baby. It's people are coming. You've thought about it for so long, but the truth is, with a TV episode, you get a script, and the showrunners have probably looked and picked 3 of their favorite locations already. You're coming in. A lot of these conversations have been talked about already, but you're still in charge of everything. Right. So your day one, where it's mostly looking at locations, your concept meeting, I found, I just ask a ton of questions, because to me, the first couple days is first day, because God, it moves so fast. The first day for me is let me understand what's in the showrunner and writer's heads as much as I can. If I can talk to them before day one, that's ideal. But as much as I can understand the show you want to make, and that I'm aligned with you, then I will get a longer leash. So I try to ask as many questions, communicate that I am really listening to them, that I'm really understanding what they're telling me, like repeating back to them the things I think are important to them. And then by day 2, I can finally come with answers. Because I think the worst thing you can do, or the worst thing for me that doesn't work for me, is like kind of coming in bullshitting. Because I think people just start to be like, you might start to get pushback, like creative pushback, and then you don't want to be in that space, you know? So yeah, I feel like the first day is really important for me to ask as many questions as I can.
That's so interesting because I think that like I constantly am asking questions at the beginning, but I found that I'm most comfortable like with the goal for me of prep is to be able to leave as much room as I can so that we're on set on a day to be able to just jam. You know,
Yeah.
That's
like
true.
I would much rather
Also-
be able to be like, you know, cool. We've talked about these obviously parameters and where we're going to park all the trucks in this
Yeah.
location, and all that. But like, I just want to really because you're still having ideas.
Yeah.
Like while you're there, like, oh,
Yeah,
like you know, when you take your phone out. If I was filming this right now, I'm like, oh, this looks nice from right here.
Yeah.
I'd be sitting there, but like, when I come over here, if you haven't left yourself the space to do that,
Yeah.
you know, then you get stuck sometimes. Early episodes of mine were I think, a lot more mechanical. They feel more mechanical when I watch them. You know, I know that I like really make every shot specific. I was like, going to get this moment when Dan, then he does this. And all of a sudden you have an actor who's like, well, what if I go over here? And that first time you're doing it, you're like, don't.
Yeah. I'm so curious too.
over there. That's crazy.
Yeah. I'm so curious, Din. I feel like, you know, it's so interesting too from television doing like something that you've written to pilot. Like, you know, we know so much about that in movies, people writing and directing, but what about your experience kind of, you know, creating television and then getting to direct that pilot and stuff?
I think that working on your own pilot still has a lot of that overlap where there's a showrunner that's still attached and there's we hired another showrunner to work with us. And so there's a lot of collaboration that's still happening and being open to other people's ideas. And I mean, I can be very opinionated and I have a very strict sense of taste, but that doesn't mean I have to be that person all the time. And so just letting things, I think to add to what all you guys are saying, one of the skills that I had to develop was like learn to ride the wave and just be comfortable that at some point we have the skill where we can just be on set and work and freestyle a little bit. And so to deviate from the question a little bit, sometimes I try not to do this and I try not to admit it to 200 people. But there are scenes where you don't get a chance to read it because it's been rewritten. And then you show up, you're like, oh, fuck, the blocking's different. What the fuck is happening right now? And so those are the opportunities to see if you belong here. Have you done all the work as a human being, as a director, as a person? And I can remember one of these scenes where the actors had to freestyle the blocking, and you just try to adjust so that the axis isn't 3 axes, it's 2, or maybe it's 1, and really understanding what the emotion, like understanding what connects to the emotion, what the mechanics are that connects to the emotion, so that when we're filming it, we're like, I know this is the axis, I know that we're still going to get the emotions, and I know if we've simplified it to fit the day, and it still works, but
because it's important, like the kernel of what you need to get emotionally,
and also trusting that I don't want to openly admit this, but I think I need to right now, is that I'm okay with like not knowing, and we're going to figure this out. And I know that you're smarter than me, and I know that I'm not going to be a dick about it so that we don't have to argue about it. Like you come in with an ego and you don't know, that's a problem.
I think I only realized that in the past like 2 or 3 years, where, a director's job to me, we have all these innate like intuitions and subconsciousness. Yeah. But especially for television and for movies as well, a director's job to me is to give everyone the opportunity to do their best job.
Yeah. Right? Absolutely.
Yeah. Because then you have you have your DP who's shot like big budget. One of my DPs recently on For All Mankind, he did Independence Day. And I'm just like, oh, you're my DP. And then we're talking about shots. And I'm just like, I have these ideas, but what would be cool over here if we started from over there? And it's like, oh, well, wouldn't it be cool if the camera did that? I'm like, well, yeah. What if we like did a little and we just collabed on something? And it's just giving everyone the opportunity and not letting your ego override them.
100%. Stay loose, man. I think that you get the best. Like, and actors, I mean, are better at, staging themselves oftentimes than, directors are. Like, I'm just like
crazy now.
Yeah. I'm just like looking and be like, hey, that's a great idea. Like all day long, be like, what's cool? What do you like? Let's try stuff together. It's so easy to be like, oh no, we have to like get this rehearsal done in 12 minutes and then move on and like be filming. And then they got to start lighting and the day's running out. And you're like, or let's just stop and talk about it for another 10 minutes. Let's like, I've had scenes where sometimes I'm like, the AD is like, we gotta, because, all my AD friends constantly tell me that, they either say we're ahead or you're behind. It's stunning. Every first AD friend of mine, all day long. And so I'm like, oh, now I'm behind by myself. Cool. But I'm like, let's take the time. Let's take the time and rehearse this. And we can do a 45-minute rehearsl and we'll find it'll be better.
Yeah. Were you going to say something, Adele?
No, I just had a follow-up question for you guys because you're so much more experienced than I am. And you're talking about the, being collaborative and not being a dick about things. I feel like I'm great with like the crew and the cast, but, when you're the director, the thing that's different is like being on the day. You might not be at this location ever again. You're running out of time. This is the one opportunity for you to get something. And how do you personally deal with it when you have like producers and like a very strong-minded actor or something, of like people who are like either second guessing or like have strong points of view about, no, this needs to happen. Like, you need to lens up over here or like, that kind of thing. When you just become the conduit and like that pressure point for all of it coming into you, like, do you have experiences with that? Or do you have like, a process in your head of like mindful breathing? Like, I want to know, tell me.
I'll say very simply, it happens all the time. And just very simply for me, I just explain to people always the cost of doing it that way, which can be time, which can be performance, which can be storytelling, shots required. We can do that. But now we're coming over here and doing this, and we're doing this, and we're doing that. Like, that's a great idea. Yeah. I agree. We should totally do that. We won't complete the day, but we could do it if you want.
Yeah. Same. Explain. Communicate.
Be like, this is it. We can totally do it. But here's the impact to it. We know because like sometimes people say things on set. People have ideas and they're great ideas, but I'm like, well, we have this much time in the day. It's just a reality. Yeah. The sun is going to go down. I can't stop it.
What if they want it anyway?
Then we'll do it.
And a part of the experience, what Kabir was talking about, is being comfortable to tell them no. Mm-hmm. I remember on a show that I had to shoot before I started prepping on that. They didn't really give me the time they promised to give me. And so they were worried it might not finish. So they asked to step down and shoot plates before the sun rises. And I'm like, so you guys want to shoot plates on this action scene so you can go some studio and just like do a static camera of the rest of the fight? And they're like, yes. And I'm like, no. And I just said, no, we're going to finish this right now. We'll finish it on time. The sun won't rise yet. But let's not like stop this machine going right now. Yeah. And let's just keep going. And we turned it in, and it was funny because people were worried. And like I had the post producer call me, can the showrunner see a cut before you work on it? And I'm like, no, I need to work on it, on Monday night or Sunday night. If I just need to work on it. And then I turn it in, and then it's like radio silence during my first week of prep. And on Friday, I'm calling them. I'm like, hey, remember the thing you guys were super worried about, that action hand-to-hand scene? And they're like, oh yeah, showrunner loved it. And I'm like, oh, thanks for making me think I might have gotten fired for 4 days, but that's just how it goes.
I mean, I've had experiences where like, I've had two, like ones where I've been able to say no. Like a showrunner really wanted a location that just me and the DP were like, it's not going to look good. And trying to explain in a way where we're understanding what they want, why they want it. But we were like, honestly, like you put a lens in any space, it's just not going to look good. And we were trying to explain that. And we won that, right? But then there's times where you're working with actors and I love like what you were saying with that, because it's like the truth is actors are the only people saying their lines, experiencing things in their body, moving around, sitting at like you might have an idea as a director in your house that looks really cool on camera, and then they'll get there and they'll just not be able to do it. And there's no like formula for that. Sometimes they're right, sometimes you're right, sometimes it's an alchemy of both. And I believe very strongly it's worth taking the extra 10 or 15 minutes to figure it out with their bodies and with the camera so that you can get something that feels organic and also looks really good. And I just don't think there's like a formula to that, like, because it's different every time. But I have worked sometimes with actors where, I mean, I could have done something differently, but like it was really rough. Like we couldn't find the blocking. We were losing light. We were shooting during a strike, and there's just no writers on set. There's no showrunner I could kind of turn to bring somebody on my team, and I was alone. And I was like, man, really, like, I really need to get this person on side. We're really stuck in the mud. We haven't shot in like 2 hours. Like, what are we doing here? And then the truth was, like, the way we ended up handling that, it was a little like, I want to be specific because I think that's helpful to be specific in stories. And I was basically like, we really kind of hit like a crossroads where I was like, you tell me what you want. And they weren't being specific. And so I was kind of like, I think it's because you don't know what you want. And I realized by the time we finally got to filming, I'd lost like 3 hours. And then it really was kind of what you said. I was like, I just had to be practical and go, okay, how can I cut the scene together? If I get like, we have 3 cameras, I just need to make sure I shoot this in a way where I can cut it together and it looks like kind of good. I mean, the way I'd originally blocked it and shot listed it, it was a cool fucking sequence. But then what I had was like enough to get like the emotional kernel of the scene and enough coverage to be able to cut it and be able to like play with it in post. And that was just, it was honestly just kind of got practical. I'm trying to be more, sorry if that's not very
No, this
specific,
is great. I guess maybe too, let's talk about, especially here at the DGA where everything is so much about your directors teams, just talking about your directorial team and your ADs and how you guys each work and communicate with your ADs. Because I
love that you take them out because I have the same idea, especially when we're on location. So my favorite place actually to take people out is in Austin, Texas, because there's just so much to do there. So I remember I shot there for 2 years and always like I'd bring my DP because they switch DPs on a lot of shows. So I bring my DP, my AD, and my script supervisor, and we would go play. There's like ping pong bars there, so we would play ping pong and get drunk. And that's like one of the weekend nights of prep always, and I love it. And it's like brings a lot of camaraderie.
Are you good at it?
I'm good at getting drunk. Yes.
That's okay.
But like on set too, like how do you guys like to communicate with your, like what's like when you're vibing, like what's kind of like your communication?
I mean, it's kind of like we were talking. It has to be a team effort. You know what I mean? I've been very, I think, fortunate with all the first ADs I've gotten to work with. Have all been excellent. We've all gotten along very, very well. Do you know what I mean? Like it's like anything else. It's like department heads she was talking about. They're in charge of so much. You know what I mean? Like they understand what they're doing very, very well, and I think that the most fun of it to me is really just like, I'm also as a sports fan, like I'm playing clock management in my head all day long anyway about like, someone you ask, like sometimes you'll have a producer or someone, an actor who wants it. Someone's like, we got to do this thing. And I'm like, okay, well, we can do it. Sure. What's it going to cost us later in the day? Yeah. I feel like I spend almost all of my time, like the majority of my time in prep, talking with the first about scheduling. Yeah. Like, let's spend time on the schedule because the schedule is going to be the key to our success on the day. Let's make sure we have the time when the day comes. So it's like, here's this scene. And like the line producer will be like, this is only going to take you 2.5 hours. I'm like, yeah, but I think we could shoot it a cooler way if we were to spend 5 hours on it. And you get pushback and they're like, and again, like, earlier career, to like being, like mid-career, not late, now where you're like still want to be able to stand up for it and be like, no, I really think we should spend the time here. Mm-hmm. Then you collaborating with the director's team makes it possible to do and to succeed on the day, just to be like, because first all the time we'll be like, you think the scene's going to take that long? One thing I like to do, a game I like to play every show, every project is, we're timing out a one-liner and like talking about how long each scene is going to take. I'm always like asked the first, I'm like, you're going to do your timings. Don't show them to me. I'm going to do my own timings. And then let's just go scene by scene and talk about it, And what we find typically is like, we're close on almost all of them, but sometimes there's always one or two. You're like, oh, you think this is going to be, I thought it was going to take a lot longer. I think you talk about why. You make sure that when we get there on the day, we understand how the entire shoot is going to go, at least what we think. And that way, like the two of us are like aligned on it and we can make the whole thing happen.
How about for you, Adele, and Anu, with the features you guys have done in picking your ADs?
I love my ADs from television, and particularly for Joyride, because here's the thing, like so many ADs have worked with directors who are like so much less experienced, like in terms of the 10,000 hours, especially when you have a crew that's been together for a while, like they just know all the ins and outs. And I felt like my AD was my work husband and my DP was kind of a little bit like your side piece where you have like all the fun, crazy conversations about all the amazing shit you're gonna do, and then like your husband was just like there, saying just like these are the practical realities of what you need to get done. And they were just like my buds. I could not have done it without my AD, because it was, you guys all know, like there's this whole game you play with like the line producer and what your budget is, and people's expectations going into it. And there's lots of like just weird shady shit you can do in terms of like what even how like you're getting your budget ready, like things that you secretly want to get done, shots you want to get that nobody is going to say yes to, but if your AD and your DP are in it with you, like you can like get all kinds of like shady things done, and nobody's the wiser for it. So like that was always great. And again, with my team, with the because it's like always about like making your day. We would try to identify what the most difficult, problematic days were, because what happens is, and this is about the craft, but it's also everything about directing is just like managing up and down. When the executives and the money people start to get really, really nervous about you've got this big thing, how are you going to get it done? And to stop people second guessing you and taking up just time in your day that you don't have, it's just being able to present people with plans of what like your most problematic days are going to be. Or if you sense that there's, like you said, that scene, that action scene that everybody's freaked out about. What I loved is just like you just had that ninja, calmness about it. It's like, we're not going to do that. We're going to do this. And like, I don't think I had that in me, but being able to break down those big problematic days in a way that was presentable up so that nobody's getting super nervous and then like coming down on you. And B, for every single super problematic day we had, we always ended like early or on time because all of us were just on it. And the only way you get that done is with your DP and your AD and the heads of departments who you've been feeding this entire time, all on that same list going just like, this is the motherfucking thing we have to get done today, and how are we going to get through this? So I felt like with your team, like in Played, like those days, no problem. It's always the days where you're like, oh, that's going to be easy. It's like 4 people in chairs, where you're just like, holy shit, how did this happen? Yeah.
And the AD actually is responsible for, firearm safety, stunt safety, everything. So it's super important that you guys are on the same page so that you can the entire crew can be aware of how dangerous some days can be. And, they're there to check everything to make sure it's safe. So it's a huge responsibility. And, I just want to be on their team when that happens. I just want to support them and make sure everything goes smoothly. Because there have been there was on Shadow and Bone, we were shooting in Budapest, and there was a high silk stunt where it wasn't a stunt person. She did silks. So she wasn't a professional stunt person, but they were supposed to drop onto a soft pad on stage, and we were shooting from the other side of the room. So, we wouldn't really see her fall. On that day my AD was like, hey, the stunt coordinator is concerned about something. Do you have a moment before we go and shoot the scene? I'm like, sure. He's like, hey, do you mind if I put some extra pads outside of our built-in safe area? And I'm like, oh yeah, sure. Why not? Just do it. And then they do it. And of course, the fall, she fell at an angle instead of straight down because she was swinging, and half her body landed on the safe area and half on the pad. So she was fine. It was a bruise. But if just that arbitrary decision with that AD not notifying me and me not saying about that pad, she would have been paralyzed for life or worse.
Yeah.
So, it's amazing the responsibility that they have, and just that, I want to be supportive of those situations so that everyone can walk home and have dinner with their family and be safe.
Actually, just for the team, like because you brought up stunts, and I think that's such an important part of it. I've just been on set for just dealing with stunt teams, and I feel like every stunt coordinator I've worked with has like a specific kind of vibe. Like these are people who like they want to take that big, insane, crazy risk. And yes, safety, but also they want to make sure that you're getting the shot you want, and they want to blow the roof off the place. And I've just been on set where they are so committed to getting it done. And even if you're like, yes, safety, that things can just go pear-shaped so quickly. I'm wondering, is there a process you have with your stunt coordinators, like, in terms of like making it really, really clear how big a priority it is? Because I've like with you, the whole thing of like, when you're taking people out to lunch, it's like, the stunt coordinators and their families, and there's this thing that goes through your head when the car flips and bams, and you're just like, oh shit.
I think a lot about like, the early piece of my career when I was like first like begging people to let me on set. No one was just offering it to me. Congratulations, by the way. And I remember filming a monster truck rally in Indianapolis, and like being like, we're just like beta cameras like standing out in the field. And I remember there's like non-union, like no ADs, none of that. And like the local like guy from the facility at the horse racing track was like, all right, and if like Bigfoot, if Bigfoot comes at you and out of this turn, go that way. Just run that way. I'm like, that doesn't seem safe. And like, working in a stunt capacity now, you're like very grateful for having experts who understand what they're doing. In season 2 of Never Have I Ever, I had, early in the season, there's an episode where, Paxton, like one of the characters, like walks out in the street, he's arguing with someone, and while he's in the street, he has to say one line and get hit by a car. And the prep work on what that is like, there's everything to me, because I'm like, we don't want to hurt anybody, I mean, this guy, the whole stunt team works so well together. Like, I'm just like, here's how I think we should film this in a way that, we're only going to do it once. Like, we're not going to hit you with the car multiple times. And of course they're like, I feel great, I'm gonna do it again. And I'm like, no, I think, we're just going to do it the one time. But the amount of time you, I think, have to spend ahead of time is vital. Because like, you've read enough stories and have friends, people who've gotten injured, and you're like, it's the last thing you want, especially for what we're doing. Like, let's all go home.
Right.
I mean, to that, like, it kind of works too with CGI stuff. I mean, only working on like She-Hulk, and I think again, Dan the Tiger and Walking Dead. I feel like I would talk about maybe the collaboration on that end with like how everything is kind of moving into, using CGI or previs kind of work.
Yeah, I mean, well, speaking about your AD relationship, when I did She-Hulk, I'd never worked with a CGI character. I'd never done extensive wire work. I mean, like, but the people at Marvel knew that. So, I didn't have to pretend I knew any of that, and they'd be able to call bullshit on that pretty quickly. But I hired an AD, David Sardi, who, God, he's incredible. He'd been working on Marvel films for decades, and he was so helpful. It was such and I'm sure there's a lot of ADs here. Their job is to help you realize your vision, and they're artists too. And he had incredible ideas. Like, he was so good about hearing me out with like creatively what I wanted to do. And he was just so great at like taking my hand and really helping me see that through. And like when we would, do our previs, he was so specific about sitting every single person down, and you go shot by shot by shot, and you speak with the entire stunt coordinator team, like the whole stunt team. We did our own, these huge department head meetings, just going shot by shot by shot from the previs. And just so there's just like in film, we know everything. There's like a bunch of things that go wrong, but there's just no questions about what you're going to do on that day. And you're not, those days take as long as they take. And it's just a very methodical kind of slow process. And it's like the same with stunt coordinators. Like, we have a wonderful one here, Eddie. We work together on based on a true story. And I think like they're artists as well, and have so like these, we're also lucky, like your department heads are, at least in my experience, they're all a lot more experienced than I am. So I just try to share like what my overall vision is. And in that way, like I end up learning so much. And I want to go back to a little bit to kind of Dan talking about like being able to say no. And I think it does kind of tie back into this like moment to movement kind of thing. And I did want to ask again, I think what's been so incredible is, this new kind of moment started a little bit with Crazy Rich Asians. And so kicking that open and that flashpoint. And so it does feel like we're in a movement that, you guys are, leading the charge and making shows and hiring crew. Like, what is the landscape right now? Going into meetings is, now that producers kind of see that there is such an appetite, even though, we've always said like, is there an audience for it? It's like the answer is yes. Kind of what's it like on the, like right now, trying to be able to show up authentically and keep pushing our stories in a way that isn't, that stuff we've seen before. Like how you guys are experiencing that. And I think that it is so indicative of being able to say no. Cause I think like we've all had that moment, like, I don't want to push back, but being able to have these stories, I think, is great and showing that there's change.
I think it's bananas in a great way how quickly it has changed. you know, I mean, you know, from that movie coming out just a few years ago, I mean, never have I ever, you know, but it was the sort of the first show about like, you know, just a first gen Indian American kid, like growing up like normal and not about like, again, like not about her trauma, just about like, she's a fuck up and that's just her life. You know what I mean? And that show came out in spring of 2020. That's like 3 years ago, you know? And at the time there wasn't one. And now like I find for sure, and like you guys talk about it, but like in meetings now, there's no longer a question, you know, in pitch meetings, in like job, there's no longer a question about like doing shows that are like Asian centered, you know? And that are no longer even about like the Asianness of it all. Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think like that'd be great just to talk about like, how we level up next, like what you guys all think about that.
Well, I agree with all of that. I will say like we're in just a weird period right now because of the strikes and also because of all the insanity that's going on with the streamers. So yeah, in the last few years, then people realize like, oh, you could put like Asians as the heroes of the story and people will still show up. It can still be a success, but it doesn't mean like they are completely familiar or understand it or have like necessarily like the talent in place to execute at a certain level. And where the industry is in this moment, if you talk to any of your reps, et cetera, they're like, we're in a moment of, contraction and fear. And so the problem is even, a lot of those scared conversations are happening behind closed doors and not necessarily, openly on a Zoom with you, where they're just like, yes, tell us about your thing with like, this like half Persian, half Asian like lead. But for more traditional things, shows, in 22-hour network television, and it's a tough time for movies and the box office, if you're not Barbieheimer, like, it's a struggle, and trying to sell those stories also. So people are like open to it, but just understanding that it's still very much an uphill battle, and that it's, we're like moving to movement. It's like the movement involves like everybody here, just like fucking showing up with your A game and pushing, because the second we still have to deal with that thing of like, if your project fails, like if a Bourne movie like goes belly up, they're not gonna be like, well, maybe people are tired of like white guy action heroes. Like nobody ever says that, whereas when your thing goes south, they're just like, oh, maybe they weren't ready for, Asian, an Asian Bourne. So whether we like it or not, like the race and, your ethnic specificity is always sort of like the first like scapegoat to your project.
Yeah, I mean, we are getting so much more opportunities if you just see just our membership increase in the Asian committee. And part of that increase in directors and people who work on set is, I think everyone has a responsibility to keep the authenticity of portrayals. So, for example, in this coming season of For All Mankind, my episode had a big North Korean segment. And for that, they were like, okay, well, what do you need to make it good? And I'm like, well, we need a North Korean consultant because all of our actors are South Korean. And they don't know how to speak North Korean. And whatever they've heard is from Korean dramas. So let's get somebody who really knows how the language of it and to consult with them. So, on set, just like when we shoot Russian scenes, I have my Russian consultant, then I have my North Korean consultant, and he actually could help their diction. And it's on us to actually say, we need another take because the intonation was wrong. And even if the actors felt they gave the best performance, it's like, you still need to be authentic. So you can give a great performance again, just with the right intonation. And, and for other directors on, more things you don't get as much creative control, every director and AD kind of has a say in background. So if you do want more Asians showing up, like what you see in LA or other places, then you can always get more Asian faces in the background. And I found like NCIS LA or anyone else like that, they're very open to that. And you can just like start populating the world with a little more Asians here and there.
They always call it, the ethnic mix. Like when they're listing off background, like, we'll get ethnic mix. I'm like, that sounds delicious.
You ever get into that conversation where like it's weird because it's all like ratios? They're like 7%,
40%
East
white.
Asian.
They're asking what neighborhood this is supposed to be. You're like, what? Oh.
Can I just add a little bit of cynicism into this conversation?
Yeah.
Finally.
There are these challenges that I think we face from the traditionalists, in which what the paradigm of the budget looks like compared to the budget we need to tell our stories. And it's as simple as, this might sound stupid, but it's as simple as, the actor needs a fork or the actor needs a pair of chopsticks. It's a lot easier to get a fork than it is to get a pair of chopsticks. I know you can get chopsticks anywhere, but that's just follow me for a second. And then what is it like when you want to go to Vancouver to film Chinatown as opposed to what it looks like here in LA or here or somewhere else in San Francisco or in New York? And you can, take that analogy and put it across all cultures. It's just a little bit more expensive and a little bit more time consuming to do our stories because we're so unfamiliar in that territory. And we together, I think, have to push for that on the executive side, the network side, the studio side. Everybody needs to come to an Asian dinner, meet our aunties and uncles, and be like, "Oh, I get it. I get it. I get it."
Yeah, can I go now?
Yeah, may I be dismissed?
Just to say what you were asking about, Maureen, about a movement, I was thinking about, so last year I directed the pilot of a series called Primo, which is on Amazon. You can check it out. It's about a Latino family. And in the meeting, when it came up, I was like, you guys know, right? Like I'm not Latino, and when I think about what, where the moment was and where the movement is, and they were like, yeah, no, we don't care. Like, you don't have to be Latino to do this story. And I think that to me is what I keep thinking about where this is all going. Cause I certainly get a lot of calls, that are like, hey, here's this Asian project. We want you to direct it. I'm like, okay, but y'all know, like, I grew up in Philadelphia. Like, I, didn't grow up like Larry was saying in the intro, like, was not concentrating on Asianness. I didn't know that I counted as Asian until I was like, I don't know, in my mid 30s. Half the planet, 4 billion people live in Asia. Like, it's like, go us. I think a lot of that starts to be about more, folding together but what's intersectional about like, well, we shouldn't all just be like directing only Asian content. You know what I mean? Like, we all have lots of other experiences. Yeah. And what's interesting about that, I think, ultimately is where the door opens to Asian projects being directed by people of other ethnicities too. I think we all start to learn each other's lives.
Let's get all our projects first and then get theirs and then we can share.
Yeah. Well, but just to follow up quickly on that, because it's that thing of like, do I have to be Asian to direct an Asian project? Do I have to be Asian to write an Asian project? And I really don't think you do. It's just about finding people who know the world and love the world, like know it forwards and backwards. Like if we just had to like write with our own cultures, I would never have been able to break into American TV writing. But just to follow up on your thing, there is the added barrier of our stories being pitched. If it's set in a certain world that is less familiar to mainstream, which is one, as a creative, if you're a director like pitching, you have the added barrier. You can't just be like, so this is like when you were like in camp in Nantucket, like, it doesn't go there. So you have to be like, let me tell you why this world is amazing and fantastic and sexy, and you have no idea, like presenting it like it's fun versus like it's medicine. It's again, it's not fair. You just have to be a salesperson and you have to do it. And then the other thing is because all our production is over here, Vancouver, like we had to shoot Joyride, which took place in the Pacific Northwest for 2 seconds. And then we're in China and Korea, and we had to shoot it all in Vancouver and the greater Vancouver area. And again, the way we got around it is like, at first I thought it could not happen because, I grew up in Asia and I was just like, and I've shot a lot in Vancouver. Vancouver looks nothing like Asia. There's a lot of like Hong Kong Chinese in there. The light is different. Like everything about it is different. And even the kinds of Asians you have. And the only way we could kind of get around it was just to hire heads of department who knew the culture forwards and backwards. And so that as a filmmaker, even if I couldn't take the audience authentically to that place, that there's something about what was on screen that felt authentic and felt true, that even if they couldn't break it down, that there was something about it that they responded to. So it's like simple things like, that's the color of a grandma's house in rural China. We just kind of instinctively know if that's bullshit or not.
Yeah.
That's so true. I love that. I kind of want to ask you guys what's currently kind of inspiring you, like music, books. Like, I think there's also so much that we, self-care. Like, I feel like that's so much that we don't talk about is like, what do you guys do to stay inspired, to take care of yourselves, that we should all be doing or watching?
I'm really inspired by my kids. I have a 6-year-old and my daughter's turning 2 on Monday. And part of the thing with the strike is I got to be essentially a full-time parent, and I'm taking him to all his soccer practice. I'm taking him to school, and just seeing them grow and be curious about the world, makes me also more curious about, what they're interested in and see things in a new light sometimes. And also helps me deal with kids more, so that when we're on set, if someone's having a tantrum, I'm like, oh, I know how to deal with this.
Yeah, so I have a 4-week-old now, which is very exciting, and I'm very inspired by remembering what it was like to sleep and thinking about it's a big deal. I took a shower today. It's very exciting. About like what I keep finding myself thinking about, like what movies I would want to show him down the line, and it's like, recent stuff, like stuff from 20 years ago, from 40 years ago, from like, and I keep thinking about that stuff because I haven't gotten to watch anything in a few weeks. So I'm excited about those things. Those things keep me being like, right, what are the important stories? What are the important, like, visual styles or important directors to watch? Like just that kind of thing, is what I can think about when I have 5 minutes when I'm not sleeping.
I'm trying to think of some books to recommend. 2 books. Well, one book, sorry, I don't have kids, so I guess I don't have children to recommend to you. But this book that I read before I do any job, I don't read the whole book, just like passages of it, is Directing Actors by Judith Weston. I'm sure some of you, I see a lot of nods. She just has incredible tools to help you, because as a director, you're constantly just trying to fill that toolkit up of like how to play with actors in a scene, how to have something quickly at the ready when a scene's not working, how to expand on a scene in the few minutes you have. And so it would like, before I would go to set every night, I'll read like one little chapter and it'll be so helpful, and it'll help me, I'll get to set and I'll be like, oh yeah, you know what, this actor, it's not really responding to this direction. Maybe if I'm just directing this other actor actually, off camera, then now the actor who's on camera is really in the scene, and it'll just help me keep me sharp. And then I was also reading All About Love by Bell Hooks, because, so it's really nice to kind of come to set with a real feeling of love, especially when you're a guest director and you're like so new and you don't really know anybody. And if you can kind of come with like, just as everyone talked about being best friends with the people you work with, it's really kind of unnatural. Like when you're a guest director in TV, you don't know anybody. And then by day 2, you're talking about, you're making decisions on the set. You're talking about everyone's like families, and you have to kind of create intimacy very quickly. Mm-hmm. And every director does it. They're like, we all do it our own special, specific ways. And, I don't know, like All About Love is really nice because it reminds me to be like kind and loving, and it's like a good way to enter a room.
I've been playing a lot of video games, so I won't talk about that.
That's good. That's creative.
What are you playing?
Cyberpunk. That's my boy right there. He knows we send each other, pictures and stuff while we're playing. It's real nerdy. I recently rewatched Dragon, the Bruce Lee story, and I was so moved. And the reason why I was because I also went and saw the 50th anniversary of his movie. It wasn't Game of Death. It was Enter the Dragon, and it was so bad. And I was like, oh shit. He kind of was an incredible actor, writer, director, and he was so great, but he never got a chance to work with incredible filmmakers. And so when I watched Dragon, I was so moved because I realized that was the only way Bruce Lee ever got to be like represented with a lot of thought and sophistication. And the music in it is so incredible. And so I've been going back to things that I guess make me cry because I'm dead inside and I need something to wake me up.
I feel you.
And the other thing that I watched was Sneakers, which is an old...
So good. So good.
God,
Yeah.
you need some wholesome
Passport.
criminals. That's like... what was the other one? I love it when you say
Passport.
passport,
Yeah,
right?
passport.
Passport.
Y'all got to watch that. It's so good.
It's so good.
Really, it's very
Adele?
inspiring. It's a really good case study of how character informs the story, and then how the story informs the character's reaction. And it's very specific because each character reacts the way they should react because they are that character. And so it just makes it very, it's a very wholesome yet interesting insight to writing, directing, acting.
Yeah, I thought of... Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, Adele.
No.
We're going to open it up soon to questions.
Oh, okay. Just like, I think my answer is a little bit of a combination. I'm just like cribbing off of everybody here. First, I'm like covered in children. I have like an 11-year-old and a 14-year-old. And I think just being a parent has taught me a lot of really valuable lessons on how to deal with people and fix my relationship with men. Probably when I had a son, I was just like, oh, you're not an asshole. You just want like a cookie, a hug, or a boob. It's one of these three things. And that just like opened up my eyes to dealing with everybody at work. But but beyond like the parenthood thing, I just like vibed so hard when you were like, I'm dead inside. Because I go from like feeling things like really intensely to just like nothing feels like anything anymore. And particularly when you're in a job that's just like grinding you. And I say this like I practice it like daily. I just have to remind myself of like filling that well of going back to things that really inspire me. I took my kid to Hayao Miyazaki's last movie, The Boy and the Heron, and I'm just there and I feel like, you know, a 10-year-old, like with every scene, every shot, every choice. And it just gets you so excited that suddenly you can kind of go back to your insane grind where everything is garbage and like, and just bring that happiness and joy back into it.
I love it. I think we're going to open it up to questions. If anybody in the audience has questions, we'll take our last. Anybody have questions? Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for all taking the time to come here. I'm really fascinated by all of the work that you guys have done, even individually. It's so diversified amongst like genres and coming of age and comedy. And I'm curious, as an aspiring filmmaker, do you guys find that it's important to diversify the things that you write or the things that you want to make, or is it more important to find your niche?
Well, when I was first going into meetings, coming out of being an editor on Walking Dead and directing it, everyone was like, oh, so you direct on this horror zombie show. Great, we heard about it. It's the #1 show in the world, but we can't wait to see what you do next. We're not going to hire you until we find what that is. And so Hollywood very quickly wanted me to like go into this niche. And it was just hard for me to find jobs as a director. And I was just editing part-time, directing part-time. And then when I finally broke out of that, even though it was like still genre, but it was like fantasy magic stuff, I was like, yes. And then calls started coming in. So I think it's important to diversify to an extent. But if you're really happy doing just something, just be happy. Like try to do as much of it as you can.
Yeah, the people that love your stuff will find you, and then they'll hire you. And the ones that want to pigeonhole you probably aren't the ones that you can collaborate with. So there's a natural.
I just needed to pay bills.
Yeah. There's a natural flow to it. But it is a deeper conversation about what you need to make versus what you want to do. It should come from your heart. Yeah. If you feel passionate about comedy, then you should do that, and people will find you.
Because you can't fake what you're passionate about. So I think if you're moving towards what feels good to you, that will never steer you wrong because your instinct will be sharper. You know, if you're kind of pretending, like if you're doing something because like, I think I should be doing it, your instinct feels a little less sharp. Maybe you make mistakes, then you start beating yourself up because it's all what's in your head. And so if you're kind of following what you're passionate about, you won't be making something, whether you'll be making the right creative decisions.
Plus, it's really fun, I think, when you work so hard for so long, like all of us, like to get to a point where you're like, I've been I've been editing half-hour comedies for a while, which took a long time. And I was like, finally, I'm editing these like big, Netflix and like HBO half-hour comedies. And as soon as you get there, you're like, well, I want to do something else now. And everyone's like, oh, you're the guy that does this. Keep doing this. You'll go, I want to I finally start directing on half-hour comedies. You're like, oh, I finally made it. And everyone's like, great, keep doing these. You're like, well, I want to do more like action-y sci-fi stuff. They're like, well, you haven't. I'm like, well, watch this. I think it is kind of interesting that, the pigeonhole thing is real, Yeah,
that is very real.
It's very real.
People won't hire, because the truth is people want to hire you if they've seen you do it before. So truthfully, it is a more nuanced conversation because it's like, truthfully, the more different things you've done, the more someone goes, oh, I feel like they can do that because they've done all this different stuff. But still, it's like you kind of can't. You say you're starting out as an aspiring director. I think if you follow what you want to do first, then more doors will open up.
That's how I got hired on Never Have I Ever season 1. I've been in a situation where I've been up on shows, at meetings, and they're like, well, we're actually looking to hire a director who sort of fits the demographic of this show. And I was like, but I okay. So when they announced that one, I was like, a show about like a first gen Indian American, like I was like, I called my reps. I was like, if we can't get on this show, then I completely quit and I'm moving home. And I didn't even meet on that show. They just offered 2 episodes,
That's
season
awesome.
1, and then just kept going.
Just to quickly add to that, the pigeonholing thing is real because what we do is so high risk that they try to limit risk wherever they can. And so it's not like people are trying to like kill your dreams. It's just like if you've only ever directed like, romantic comedies, they're just like not going to give you Alien. But just going back to my, like writing background, like whenever I felt like I was stuck in a box, that thing of like, oh, you're like the soft female character writer. I went out and I wrote what I call my stabby pilot and just got as many motherfuckers like stabbed in it as I possibly could so that I could show it to somebody, and it totally worked. And so again, it's harder when you're directing, you have to put it together, but it really just takes like one strong piece of material, and it doesn't have to be like a big studio thing. It can just be a thing that you have on YouTube and be like, look, I can do this.
Yeah.
Cool.
I mean, going off of that, so I've done a lot of genre sci-fi horror, but lately, right before the writer's strike, I was contacted by a really famous stunt team to work with them on a short film. And it was really fun for me, something to do over strike. But now I'm starting to get these meetings where they're like, oh, you can do these like big elaborate action sequences. Let's talk. So, sometimes things will just fall into your lap or something.
I love this.
Listen.
Anybody else have another question? Do we have any more questions from the audience? No? No questions?
My question is for Kabir specifically.
He
you
loves
were
this.
directing Primo, how did you approach those actors? They're mostly Latinos, right?
Yeah, pretty much all. Yeah.
How did you do your research in order to get to their plays or?
I think it's a great question because. Thanks, Fly Eagles Fly. I felt very much that like, exactly. I felt very much that like my job there was to listen. Do you know what I mean? And because there's so much that you don't know, and then the real challenge is that you don't know what you don't know, right? In any situation, and not even just like working, in a story about like a Latino family. But my connection to that material, and I talked about this in my original meeting with them, was family chaos, aunties and uncles around, just people walking in the door. And I was like, oh, this I know a lot about. I know about family members who would show up and just be there. And you're like, why are you here in the house right now? Like, we live here. You don't live here. What are you doing? Thematically, like talking about themes. I think this is for all of us, probably for everybody. Like when you connect to material in a thematic way, right? As a main character in this show, like is this kid who's like, alienated, a little lost, sort of stuck, doesn't really fit in anywhere. And I was like, oh, I know that story. That's how I grew up and how I still feel right this minute. I think that's the idea. If you can find a hook into something that you connect to, then what's really cool then is then you end up making, a show or a movie, or you end up making it more like that, just because you're part of it now. And the same way it becomes part of you, you become part of it.
And to go back to what you said earlier, which was you listen, you ask questions, and that opens up the opportunity for you to experience what the actors understand, and then you can gather intel and regurgitate that back.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay.
No pressure if you don't want to answer, but for everyone, what's next? What are you working on?
Next year, I think.
Still sort of waiting for the SAG thing to.
Well,
Yeah,
if
we
it was to
can't
go,
shoot
do you
yet.
guys have any projects in the pipeline? Things you're writing?
I'm set for Star Trek season 3. I was supposed to shoot in end of May, and it was like TBD, maybe December. And now that the strike's still going on, it's like, hey, hold tight.
Yeah.
I did just finish my first feature. I finally got to make my little art house movie. Thank you. And so, we're going to hopefully be done with it by January, which is nice.
We sold a show to Disney. What is it now? October of 23. So we sold it 2 years ago. And over the last 2 years, we lost the head writer on the show fell out. It was a musical. We lost the composer. We lost the studio exec in April. There was a strike, and last week they passed. It's fine.
I started a small production company with a producer, a friend of mine, and just to have more creative latitude, especially because I'm a writer. If I'm pitching for something as a director, they're just like, well, okay, so now you're show running this, and we own your ass for however long. And we sold our first feature for me to like write, direct, and produce. It's about a lot of like moms with like murderous rage issues, something I don't relate to at all.
I'm just working on Asian Baby Girl. We have I don't know how much I can talk about it, but there's a new writer. We're in redevelopment, and we'll see if Freeform is still around.
I'm very excited for you.
I think we have time for maybe one more question back here.
Can you all talk about your experience working with music composers, especially if you don't have a music background, but if you do,
In TV, if you're an episodic director, they temp music in, and then the showrunner and the main composer ultimately chooses that music. So as a director, at least for guest directors, you can sway them with whatever you and the editor put together in the temp. But ultimately, that is more the experience of these guys over here and pilot guy over here.
And money, and how much it costs.
As like, I'm not a musician, and the few times, in TV, I won't work directly with a composer, very rare. Or I only did once on the pilot A, but it was mostly the showrunner had a really clear idea. And so I kind of took a back seat there. But with the feature I just did, or there's a composer I work with, and I'm not a musician. And so I just say what I don't know, which is I don't know that, but I can speak to emotion. So I'll use all the adjectives I can about how I want to feel here, what this feels like. And most composers are used to that. I mean, most composers, some of them work with very musically inclined people, but a lot of them work with people who don't speak music. And you can just be as communicative as you can with, as a director, what you want the audience to feel, what feels a little, you could use like, what is it, onomatopoeia? When you're just saying like the sounds of things, like it should go here and then it should be ding, 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 and then you're like, is that stupid? And a composer might go kind of, but then they'll do a couple arrangements and you're like, I like that. So you don't have to, like if it's so new to you, more speak with emotion, or you can even show examples and just try to kind of get close and then be open, obviously, to whatever.
What's your hurdle with it?
Oh, this is getting personal.
Ooh, I like asking the questions of the audience. This is great. Can we do this?
A return, a volley.
I was struggling with something, and then I was like, I'm gonna buy a piano, and then I'm gonna like maybe
You want to make the music yourself?
No, not make the music, but just to be like if oh gosh, I didn't expect this to turn on me. I guess it's just like sometimes in the arrangement, or if something's not quite working, like finding that specific language to give back to a composer, but being respectful.
I think that is, you've already done it. I think you just did it. I think you were just basically just talking to the composer. Yeah. You know what I mean? About like, because it's like anything else. It's like, you may not be like, I don't know, an expert on props, and you're working with a props master and you're like, I don't know, like she would be sitting here holding something, right? And they'd be like, what about this? You're like, that's a great idea. So much of directing is like acknowledging great ideas and being like, cool, let's get that into the mix, Yeah.
I would add that it's always about the landing and how you use your words. So, once you figure that concept out, you can apply that, rinse and repeat, how we communicate with each other. And my words to a composer would be like, instead of saying something that I normally used to say was, this isn't working, this part is bad, I would use better words and say, these parts are working really well, and here I'm not feeling it because, and really, as a person who wants to understand other people, I do try to study music and learn some of the vocabulary so that I can stumble my way through it, and at least they know that I'm trying,
Just a quick thing of like just practical things you can do too. It's hard to express what you want to say musically in words sometimes. There are a lot of playlists on Spotify. If you can think of a moment in a movie somewhere where you're just like sort of like this, look up that composer's name in that movie, and they will, chances are, have a playlist of their library available on Spotify. And then also, again, depending on like the kind of production you have, your editor, your music supervisor can also help you, because that's the thing that's just going to take time of like you trying to find exactly the right comp cue to give to your composer. But there are resources out there. Just, take the 2 seconds to be just like, what are those resources and how can I quickly access them?
Yeah.
When I was an editor, we used to temp music all the time. And, showrunners often fall in love with what they temp with. So then the composer has a guideline of like, this is what they loved. And they might not always do that because they might hate that other composer you used. But, it'll be in the vein of that. So, sometimes work with your editor, or if you're an editor, like really think about the soundtracks and how to build that into the piece as a guideline. But of course, I think just with any collaboration, you shouldn't go to your composer and be like, do this exactly. It's like, oh, it's like I like a lot of what this has. Let's see what you bring to it.
All right. Well, that is our time. But I just want to say what an honor it was to have all of you guys here on this panel. I learned a lot. I had such a great conversation. Thank you all for coming. And actually, everybody can join us in the atrium for some food and beverage, and we can continue the conversation. So thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.